Alrighty, well, sorry about the late hop on. I was looking at some documents and missed the time, I guess. So, did a little looking around. At some other games. So, one of the things that's when looking at and figuring out how to do my setting for my game design, my tabletop role playing game design and storytelling, and potentially translating it over to computer game based gameplay. When looking at some of the things that I want to do with some of that, you bump against some of the walls of the systems that exist. So the rules that exist for one of the biggest, most well-known role-playing game systems out there, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and its relative of old school OSR D&D games, they hold a relative monopoly on systems on which games are played for tabletop role-playing games. They're not the only ones that exist out there. By far, there are a bunch of others. But for my gameplay system, I feel like I'm tweaking so much of it to make it fit my idea of my setting, and it's given me permission to go in and dabble with things that I always felt a little bit not quite right about the system. Like, it's hard. It's hard to really explain what's going on when I look at those things. But as I've explored the opportunities to play around with the system in which you play these games, I've come more and more approaching the idea of potentially just building a new one, building a new system. So, like, one of the situations about a tabletop role-playing game like D&D 5th edition is you start with 6 stats. You have the strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, intelligence, and charisma. Now, theoretically, this is meant to be split between mental and physical attributes. So strength, dexterity, and constitution are the physical attributes, and intelligence, wisdom, and charisma are the mental attributes. For the most part, what they're used for in a lot of ways seems like arbitrary attribution. So in 5th edition, there's some aspects of taking a character's intelligence score and having them do a skill check with that. Or a character can acquire a skill in gameplay or through design of the character at the first level of gameplay. And so a person might have a strength skill that they could skill check against, but if their strength is like a low level, they can also invest in skills that are of the strength category. So in this case, it would be athletics. So you can have a low strength score, but a high athletics bonus that allows you to do athletic things past what your strength score would let you do. And that's just part of the complicated setup of the rules and systems there. And there are aspects of this that I like, where there has been discussion among the community about atypical application of some of these things. So, as we said with physical attributes, we have the strength, the dexterity, and the constitution. Now, if you wanted to, and you had a good DM doing this, you could do a dexterity-based athletics roll as a skill check. And I like that ability of these things to shift their relationship to each other. So there's skill checks like I said, you have the strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. But then you have the skills in those subsets. One of them is like a intimidation, which I believe is either an intelligence or a charisma based. I forget for sure. But at any rate, you could shift that over to a strength based intimidation check, which makes sense. You can have somebody using their strength to intimidate somebody. And I like that kind of ability to play off of those related traits. I don't know that I always agree with the standard 6 strength, dexterity, constitution, and whatnot. And for a little while, I was going with an idea of using a set of 3. So I was basing it off of some of the mythological structures of body, soul, and spirit, or heart and soul, or heart and spirit and body, or heart and mind and body as a three-way on that one. And that is sort of like, it has mythological roots, but my setting is predominated by the concept of a 6, the number 6 being important. So hexagons and the 6 first mothers and the 6 realms outside of the central realm. So the number 6 does fit. I could use the 6 stats for D&D, and that'd be perfectly fine. But there's a part of me playing around with an additional concept. Because here's the thing. With the predominance of the number 6 in the setting, I have 6 elements, not 4. We're used to earth, air, fire, water as the 4 elements of earth, of the world. They're the primordial elements. If you look at, I think it was Pythagoras believed there were 5 of them. There were 5 essences. There were, the 5th one was ether, or like the quintessence. That's where it comes from. The quintessence means the 5th essence. So they had 5, and that seems to be the common trend around the world. I think in Asia there were 5, but if I remember correctly, one of the ones I looked at, they had earth, fire, water, metal, and wood were their 5. And they had no air. Air was not considered to be one of the elements. And when I built through my system and started establishing the mythology of my setting, I can barely remember why I landed on choosing 6 as the base number of everything, but that's where we went. And so I made my 6 elements to be earth, metal, water, cloud. We can call that brume, as that BRUME was one of the translations of cloud or mist. And then air or wind, and then fire. And they grade through, like, earth is solid, tangible, inflexible. Metal is solid, tangible, flexible, or shapeable, or, the distinction of the ductility of metal from the brittle nature of stone and mineral. And then water is not solid, but it's more tangible and it's formable in a degree that's like metal. And then you move into cloud, where it's even less solid, still mildly tangible, but you can move through it and it will form back around on the other side of your fingers. You move your hand through mist. The mist doesn't have these broken cracks in it that remain indefinitely after. It's sort of self-healing. And then after that is air, where you see through it. You move through it. It moves around you. You might be able to stir it, but you can't really shape it. And then fire is even less tangible than wind. It has energy, it has heat to it, but you can't do a lot to a flame. And so those 6 elements is how I arranged the elements of the setting that I was building. And I got to thinking earlier tonight, what if I used that with the system of sulfur, or body, soul, spirit, that 3-way cross charting with the 6 elements? Because if you look at Paracelsus and his approach to alchemy in the Middle Ages, in his treatise on alchemy, he talks about how the body is the sulfur, the salt, the soul is the sulfur, and the mind or the spirit is the mercury. The sulfur helps the mind bind to the body, and such on. And so that gives us a foundation for working on how a being is created. You know, a zombie could easily be a mindless body with a soul in it, and its consumption of other beings is an attempt to fulfill that missing piece. And you can do ghosts as maybe a soul and a spirit bound together without a body. And you can play around with some of those aspects of that kind of thing. But what Paracelsus talks about in some of his alchemical treatises is to talk about how the salt of a being, the body of a being, is itself composed of many elements. So in the real world equivalent of the 4 elements, he can talk about the earth of the salt, or the salt of the earth, or he can talk about the sulfur of the earth, or the spirit or the mercury of the earth. And each one of those categories has like a corollary overlap. You have the salt of a thing, the body of a thing, having earth, air, fire, water aspects to each of them. And so sulfur would have an earth, air, fire, water for it. And mercury would have an earth, air, fire, water. And so you have 4 times 3, you get, what is that, 12? Yeah, 12. So you have that 12 intermixing aspects. And in some of the alchemical recipes, he talks about mixing the, what was it, the sulfur of the earth with the salt of the water, and getting different concoctions that way. And I got to thinking, this might be a way to do some of what I'm thinking, where I can take the idea of the 3 stats. I got to remember how to count when I'm on camera, I guess. I can take the 3 stats of the body, the soul, and the spirit, and give each one of them the 6 elemental aspects of it. And each one of those gives you a chart of about, I think it's 18 combinations. And those 18 combinations happen to be the exact number of skills that your character can acquire, like the athletics, the acrobatics, the perception and intimidation values that D&D 5th edition uses. So there's a part of me who's like, I feel like that possibility of building a chart out like that suits me to a T. It's like building game mechanic clockwork. But I have to wonder to a certain degree if that throws off that ability to do the mixing and matching. Like in the D&D 5th edition version of this, we have the ability, like I said, to do a strength-based intimidation. Whereas if I absolutely delineate out that a soul-based cloud-based, so soul, the cloud of the soul could be something like intimidation. Just for example, I haven't netted it out yet whether or not that's the case, but a cloud-based soul could be intimidation, but that sort of eliminates the possibility of doing that differently in the future. So I haven't quite cracked it yet, but there's that little bit of like mental excitement about the possibility of that system working out in some way that's hitherto untested. Because there's a aspect of game design, especially for role-playing games, that I really do like, and that's the ability to take things that seem to be separate traits and make them modular components into making something else possible. So like the alternative skill checks where you're using a strength base for what's usually an intelligence or a charisma based check on a skill that's part of like the charisma set. So like the strength based check on charisma based intimidation is a way of doing things differently that gives a character role playing opportunity. And like I want my magic system to work that way sometimes. I want my skill checks to work that way. I kind of want a lot of the aspects of the game design to work with that one piece modifies another piece for customizable ways of doing things that you wouldn't otherwise think of. So like in a certain sense, in gameplay, there is a role for deception and there's a role for knowledge. And I like the idea of being able to bluff a character, and that's where deception would come in. But can you do deception with a physical trait like dexterity? Yeah, we should be able to. And being able to pair things in a different way than the usually ascribed pattern is something that enables more gameplay option. And I think the trick to this is that kind of setup works best at a tabletop. So if I were to try to translate these features over to like a computer role-playing game, those sort of acts don't translate as well. So being able to do a strength-based intimidation or a dexterity-based deception, those sorts of it's like a recipe. It's like a cookbook where you're testing out how changing the ratios or changing the order of operations changes the recipe. Like a computer is less able to tolerate that than a tabletop game would be. So I think a more restricted, straightforward, less flexible system uh, would work good for the computer game version of games that I might build. But I want to be able to open up that ability to do that custom strategizing and role play in the tabletop version. I don't know. I mean, I may end up having to devise just two separate systems. Because the gameplay for a computer has to be if this, then that. Whereas a tabletop game was like, well, if I do this differently, if I come up with a different idea of how to apply this kind of aspect to the scenario we're in, like that's what tabletop games are best suited for. So, I mean, that's what I'm bouncing my head around this evening, but I hope it doesn't interfere with my sleep tonight. I'm still trying to get recuperated from all that. But no, the process of learning a little bit about some other systems of gameplay that are out there, it's showed me some interesting systems that I didn't know existed, and some of them are horrendously bad. Like joke bad. Like they are the laughing stock of game creation communities. Like they're the example of what you look at so that you don't make those same mistakes. And there's a semi-famous one, I won't even name the name of at this point, which was created by a statistician with charts upon charts of numbers to gauge and understand all manner and degree of things about your character. And I mean, like, they made a big to do about the new Cyberpunk CD Projekt Red coming out, where you could customize your character's design in a lot of ways. There's a tabletop role-playing game by this statistician that gives you a lot of the same capabilities to customize what your character's like. And like that's not needed for a tabletop role-playing game. I mean, what kind of games are you playing that's important information? But the game also has I mean, it's really hard. Like I managed to find a copy of a PDF of the core rule book, and it's got some racial problems. It's got some gender problems. It's got some uses the R word for mentally disabled individuals. It hits all the offensive buttons it could possibly ever want to hit. And the system looks like it's clunky as all hell. Like, because they gave you the statistics to be able to do and figure out everything. So it becomes this system of trying to figure out if your swing of your double-headed axe, if you swung it overhead rather than underarm swing or side swing, how that affects the outcome, and whether or not you lop off a limb or do damage to the internal structures of the torso, or take a, a sliding hit and hit backside of the blade to somebody's helmet. It's like nobody needs that level of detail. Well, I mean, maybe if that's your thing, that's your thing. But like, if every roll of a combat scenario takes 3 to 5 minutes, you're gonna have brutally long, bordering on tedious action sequences. And they shouldn't be tedious. They should be fast and furious. But yeah, so I found that system, and I looked up some forum discussions and reviews of it, and found some people referring to other systems that do each of the parts that this system does badly better, but don't lose any of the detail. And I was like, okay, so now I've got a lot of homework to do, to go looking through some of these other systems and see what kind of mechanisms they use. But I mean, it's sort of a fun thing to do. I mean, I spent some of today doing that, but I spent a greater part of today building up the plans for what I'm doing over on Opportunity Forge. And I'm sort of formulating my plan for what I'm going to do here. I've kind of gotten to the point with this channel where I don't know that doing shorts is right for all the parts of what I want to do here. Because I was thinking about trying to do the taste test videos as shorts. It's not worth the time trying to do that as a short. It's more complicated to make those shorts than it is to just do them. So I will do that portion of stuff on here in its usual format, I guess. I think the book reviews for shorts, I think I can still do, and possibly the character prompts and setting prompts and those types of things for books, movies, and sometimes video games, maybe board games or tabletop games. But as it stands, doing shorts for some of that, not hard. Some of the other parts, like the artworks and the taste tests and those types of things, I think I have to be willing to let them be longer. And as for what else is going on today, sort of building out the last bit of my comedy routine that I'm working on. I'm not terribly impressed with what I got so far, and I'm hoping for one of those last minute, like, oh, this worked out way better than I thought, because I mean, I changed my mind midway through the month about how I wanted to do this, and I think that sort of set me back a bit. So we'll see where that ends up. We're getting ready to head into the photography month, making the photography series. So I got to get that in my mind started already, so that I have a sense of like my planning and what I'm going to do with it. Because I know we talked about doing scientific photography, and we talked about doing food photography and landscape or scenery or abstract photography. And I mean, we have all four of those options to explore. You're trying to get 150 photographs in the course of a month along a theme like that. And I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to see what I can pull off. But I also am thinking along the lines of, theoretically, I will be out of the job that I'm in sometime in May. Now, whether or not I start up another one before the end of the month of May, I don't know yet. I think we'll have to find out. But I can't keep going where I'm at right now. So that's sort of all on my plate right now. I am getting my first COVID shot on the 6th of May. I intend to take the days after off. Since I've already had it, theoretically, I'm supposed to react to the first shot like most people react to the second one. But who knows? I will do whatever anyway. I will take a couple days off from work just to be on the safe side. And then I theoretically will have a second shot somewhere in the month of May, right? How many, is it 2 weeks apart or something like that? 3 weeks apart? I'll find out. And then, yeah, it's just sort of like the year's already going pretty fast. I got to keep track of where things are right now. June comes around. I got to do my car inspection and registration stuff. Pay off some bills. Probably have to do a fair number of repairs to the car. But I'm hoping by then even I will be able to start doing maybe some blacksmithing, things like fire breathing and those types of things. Those are all sort of on the plate. Yeah, and other people talk about the single shot from Johnson & Johnson, and it's in my head to ask whether or not certain ones are better for protecting against the variants. Because I think that's what we're going to see more of. Is the original coronavirus that was in this area, in all probability, it's on its way to being protected against with the vaccines and the number of people who have already had it. The question in my mind is some of those other variants that are out there, if they are less protected against through the vaccines, this is the second generation of them that's out there. I imagine we're going to see coming out of India a third and fourth potentially variant, generation of variants that will be different enough from the second generation that they could potentially become less susceptible to the vaccines. Not susceptible, that's not the right word. Less preventable by those with the vaccines. And so I'm wondering if there's any data out there about which ones are best against the variants. But that's sort of a gamble at that point. Because, I mean, you're trying to protect against a third generation of pandemic that isn't here yet. And it's very well likely, or even not necessarily likely, but very well possible that something that's better against the second generation will be worse against the third generation than the one that's good against the first generation. So it can be a little bit hit or miss. No guarantees. So I mean, any which way it goes, whatever shot I'm going to get, I'm going to get. I'm not particularly sweating bullets over it. But there is a part of me that wonders if Johnson & Johnson is better, or if I'd be better off with one of the two-part vaccines. Yeah, that's just something on my mind. As it stands, that's my ramble about tonight. Actually, I did a fair bit of delineating out earlier today some of the ideas for bringing some of my game designs from previous years to market. So I was looking at my card games and my dice games and stuff like that, and really thinking about like what will I need to do to bring them to a saleable market, and like detailing some of that is something I can discuss a little bit more over on Opportunity Forge as we go. But I was taking some serious looks at some of those and really thinking about like the number of computer game designs that I came up with. I actually have on paper some of that. The video games we did: Cuddle Pop, the puzzle game, the Liquid Metal Rage, Captain Mr. Space Ninja, the zombie game, Presence and Slime Boy, Captain Cosmos Trivia, like the Captain Cosmos was like the choose your own adventure video game, and I did the Phaeton Noir those years ago, and those I count them as video games because they're games using video and computers. But and then we have some of the trivia games that we talked about doing as interactive sort of choose your own adventure trivia as well. And that's not counting the podcast games that we talked about doing. And like each one of those is a type of game that theoretically, if I had the time, not working a job that's just wrecking my time for minimal pay, I could devote time to bringing these things up for sale in the next few years. So like a year or two, I wouldn't want to go much past 2 years before I get them out there, because at that point they're just sitting there doing nothing after you've come up with them. So I want to get together a group of people to do some play testing. And as we get some of that going forward, the idea of being able to start releasing them for sale is the sort of hope for that. And that's just the video game aspects of that. There's the board game aspects of the board games. And so between the two of them, I believe I have something on the order of probably about 15 or 16 different games I could get released at some point. And I want to do it over the next 2 years. I mean, if we did, I imagine in between now and 2 years out, I could probably fill out a little bit more of that. So I have 6, 7, 8, no, I have 12, 13, 14, maybe 15 or 16. So 16 game ideas for computer and tabletop games. 16. 2 years, if you did one every month, would be 24 months. So I could see maybe getting 8 more games designed between then and now. Like I could fairly well, if I set myself the pace, do a new game release every month for 2 years. At least a year and a half. Yeah, I could probably do a year and a half easy. A new game every month for a year and a half. That sounds like an awful lot. But if it gets them out there to market and, lets me start making, it's probably going to be minimal money, but a little money off of my creative projects, then even better for it. And in the meantime, I will be working on my YouTube channels. I will be trying to start at some point getting money for being a professional artist. I will probably self-publish some books and stuff. it's a lot to have happen, and it would be great if I could get the time just to do those things rather than having to work jobs like the one I've had to work for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, which drain my existence and pay me very little and recompense. But for now, we are 40 minutes in. I have to probably get one more thing to eat tonight, do a little bit last minute stuff, and then I gotta go to bed because I've got another shift to work tomorrow. So I won't get a lot of chance to work on anything else. All right. So for now, take care and have a good night. A lot on my plate in the near future, I guess. Yeah, me too. I mean, from what I hear, it's like, what is it? 1 out of 1,000,000. Like, it's literally 1 in 1,000,000 risk of something negative. I'll take it. All right. Catch you later. What's today?